What you see in front of you are most of the components that would be fitted to a 1960 John Deere 2-cylinder 430 tractor equipped with power steering. If you watched any of my previous videos on my little 430 standard restoration project, I've probably mentioned that it's had factory power steering a time or two. And this video, or series of videos, is going to document how we cleaned everything up and got it looking to where you see it here. Rather than have one long mega video, I'm probably going to break it down into chapters. We'll talk about the flow divider, the pedestal, and maybe the pump in their own separate sections, so it's not to lose your interest. There'll probably be a little repetition at the beginning, kind of covering power steering system, how it all fits together, but a little redundancy is a small price to pay for a shorter video, I suppose. In Chapter 1, we rebuilt our flow divider valve. In Chapter 2, we refurbished our power steering pedestal. So for our next installment of our power steering rebuild series, we're going to focus on this power steering pump. This is the later style pump used on John Deere 430 2-cylinder tractors. I may redo a earlier style pump in a future video, but for today's purposes, Chapter 3 is going to revolve around tearing into this pump and seeing what's in there and hopefully putting it all back together and taking it from looking like this to looking like this. So let's jump in. This will be my first time tearing into one of these. It's, if not the same thing as an automotive style pump that was used back in the day. I know the earlier model to this one was often used in General Motors cars. It was a Saginaw type pump. I imagine John Deere just sourced these in from an outside supplier and made them fit to their tractors. So I'm not even sure how this one exactly comes apart. I'm going to think that we have to remove maybe these fittings on the back of this unit here and pull this whole cover off the inside part. So let's see if that's the case. Hoping this isn't under a lot of tension. There we go. Little O-ring on that part to pay attention to. So as best I can tell, that would be the only two parts holding this cover to this inside casting here. So let's see if we can kind of getting some movement. I believe there's going to be a big O-ring that kind of seals the two surfaces here. Yeah, there's our O-ring right in there. Interesting. Very interesting. Essentially, inside the inner workings, there's going to be the important component of what's called a ring, rotor, and vane assembly that spin on the shaft that generate the pressure for our power steering system. I believe we may have like a pressure valve in here and a couple other gadgets to regulate the pressure and how much this pump puts out. Don't quote me on it, but I think what we might have to do is pull off this back cover, because I don't see any other way of extracting the components forward. So I'm going to get my little ring pliers and we'll pull that ring out there, see if we can pop this guy off. So the issue I'm having is this cover is held in with this snap ring in here, and there's no sensible way, at least in my primitive mind, of getting a hook and a hold of that snap ring to squeeze it, get it out, and release that cover. I might go over to the press, try pushing down on this a little bit, see if that relieves some tension, but it's a pretty stout ring. And you know, there is no actual service manual that kind of goes over this particular style of pump. The 440 manual actually talks about the old style of pump, the one with the reservoir on the top, but no manuals that I'm aware of cover this pump. There may be one out there that I just don't have in my library. I did go ahead and pop this little snap ring out that was here. This little plunger came out, and then we have a spring and what looks like a little shuttle valve in there. And there is a little threaded guy down in there, which I'm wondering if that's some sort of pressure adjustment in that opening, which I may not mess with right now. I'm going to try and focus my attention on getting this ring off so we can get the shaft and all the other parts out of the inside. So what I've got, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a teeny little hole. It's kind of sort of drilled into this recess here. I'm going to push my ring so it just covers it there. See, you can't see. I'm going to use a little bent tip tool to try and get the hack of it there. And just tease him out like so. Now I'm going to set the camera down so I can use two hands to do this. I've got it started. You can kind of see where I've got the hook underneath the end of that ring. Sorry if all you're looking at is my elbow. But try and get a screwdriver up underneath. Just like that, we got her out. Right, let's pop this cover the rest of the way off, and it's gonna fight us coming out. There we go. We got two springs holding tension on that. You can kind of see where the springs were riding on that cover. The spring should be riding on a couple pins in there. Let's see. The pins should come out. This whole plate assembly should come out of there as well. There is an O-ring somewhere in here, so let's see if we can. There's an O-ring there, probably for that aluminum cover, and behind this plate you're going to find that ring vane rotor assembly. So I wonder if now we might even be able just like that, tap on our shaft. It's going to release that plate, and then rotor, ring, vane assembly, and these actually look pretty good. Sometimes in these pumps, apparently whether it's this style or whether it's the older style, that splines on the rotor or the rotor itself will be cracked. I've gotten some that have some wear on the ring, and then the splines on the shaft can also be worn in some cases. So I'm going to take all that out of there. And our shaft should, if we take the nut and the keyway, might be in there somewhat snugly.
Well, maybe it doesn't matter on the keyway. We'll see. There we are. Good. Splines on that shaft do not look terrible. I think the little line that we're seeing is just a little bit of debris. There might be a little something in there. But I actually do have some replacements for these on this style pump if we found that the vanes in the rotor were bad. But these, like I say, these don't look too bad. We're going to go ahead and do our usual. Give everything a good washing up. Assess the reusability of everything here. If it all checks out, we'll slap it back together and call it good. But
well, for a guy not knowing what he's doing, we did manage to get a big pile of parts sitting here on our table today, looking like we managed to successfully take this pump apart. I did go ahead and pull the seal out of the front up here. Same part number seal it's actually used on the older style of pump. The next plan is to hose all the oil off, put some new O-rings in, reassemble everything. We'll see if we can remember what we did to get it apart and hopefully put it back together just as easy. We have disassembled and cleaned the components of a power steering pump that specifically in our case we removed from our little John Deere 430 standard tractor, 2-cylinder engine. This is a style of pump that would have been used on the 430's serial number 158075 and up. Some later 440 2-cylinder tractors, the gas models, also use this same pump. Done some digging to try and find the O-rings and seals that we'll need to rebuild this pump. Some things still available from John Deere. The front seal the shaft rides through, a number of the O-rings. One of the O-rings has a specific part number change. Some of the others weren't offered on Deere's website any longer. They may have been cross-referenced to other numbers. I've used my little O-ring kit to find pretty comparable matches for what's there. The P51212 is a little O-ring that fits on the end of our little fitting. I believe this is the 12286 is the little ring that fits on the end of this plunger. It'll go into our casting over here. And then this guy here, the 12272, is the little O-ring that's going to fit in that little orifice there on this pump. One of the things one wants to pay attention to, whether it's this style pump or the pump that was its predecessor, are the splines on the shaft and also the corresponding splines on this rotor assembly. Put the two together, you'll notice there's a little bit of play between the two. There's probably been some wear, and you can almost feel it a little bit when you run your finger over one side with your fingernail. If I reverse it, maybe not as much, maybe just as much, I don't know. But I still think this will work. For curiosity's sake, somewhere in my travels I found an new old stock kit. It's got the vane, the rotors, the ring in it. I thought we'd just check it compared to the original and see. Yeah, I think there's just as much there, so it's not going to benefit us any to use the new old stock. We're just going to keep that as a kit, reuse our originals. I think it's going to hold up just fine. So for starters, let's take our casting, put our new T10769 seal in there and kick off our reassembly. Got our new seal, our custom seal driver, and we've got our front seal pushed in place. I'm just going to use the parts manual as a guide to put everything back together again, because there is no service manual portion for this type of pump. I mentioned I was a little skeptical about removing this threaded component when I was doing disassembly. The parts manual doesn't even show the parts breakdown for those parts in there. It just talks about the valve that goes in this port. So yeah, we're going to leave that one alone. What I want to do next is put my 2 O-rings back in place. Put those in there and then maybe work on the shaft after that. I've put a front and a rear as far as just their respective positions in the pump. So we'll grab one of these out. I'm probably going to give it just a light coating of grease on there to make it sticky so it stays in that little bore that it goes in. There we are. So there's that one. Do the rear. And he goes. There we gotcha. Okay, 1, 2, in their respective places. Now, I think I'm going to drop the shaft in there, and I'm just going to put a little bit of grease up here on this front component. Not a lot, just enough to make it slippery enough to want to slide through our seal up here without grabbing on. It's in there. May give it just a little bump. There we are. And hopefully, doing so, our seal's still in good shape. Now from here, I can see a couple little holes down in there. I think I'm going to take our 2 pins and put them down the respective holes in there. Like so. Can't tell if that guy's... Yeah, they seem to be about the same distance in, so that should be able to act as an alignment for everything else coming in. I think I'm going to go ahead and splash a little bit of fluid in here. The original fluid was a type A, which is kind of obsolete. I'm going to go ahead with like a Dexon, Mercon, the red stuff. Put a little bit in there. Kind of like the red stuff from the simple standpoint that if your tractor develops a leak, you can look at the color. You'll know if it's red. It's coming from your power steering system and not your hydraulic unit or your engine. Next piece, I believe, is this plate here. Part contacts the rotor flush with the back of the casting here, and we're just going to try and line it up on our 2 pins in the hope that it's going to want to cooperate and slide over the shaft as well. Like so. There we are. We're down in there. The next part is going to be the tricky part. That's the rotor, the ring, and the vanes. Putting our vanes in our rotor, it's very subtle, but one end of the vane is flat. The other has a bit of a rounded edge to it. And I try to put the rounded edge facing out, like that. And we'll go all the way around, paying attention with each one.
And our last one. Okay. Vanes in place. We can do this a couple ways, but I think we might try and, if we've got those sitting there, they seem to be pretty happy there, we'll put our ring in place. I pause for a minute to make sure I get my orientation of my arrow correct. If I go over to the old service manual that talks about the other pump, it gives me an idea that the pump should move counterclockwise, I'm guessing, which is how I have this ring set up to go here back in our pump, if I can steady the camera. So we're gonna go that route. Get our ring dropped in on the pins. Rings in place. A little splash of our fluid in there. Now we can try and delicately take our vane and rotor assembly. Make sure there's no specks of dirt on there. Try and drop him in there. Okay, got everybody happily seated in there so far. Now the next plate is one that's actually going to be important because it's going to ride up on this O-ring here. So we want to make sure that we're happy with everything, and I'll probably, like I said, put another splash of fluid in. There is no retaining ring on the back of that shaft with this ring and rotor assembly. And the other pump, the old style pump, there's a clip that holds that to the shaft. So check my parts here: plate, ring, rotor, vane, O-ring, and then cap. Our cap will go in there. Line up over the pins. Boom. And we're in. Now we have the two springs that sit on top of the pins, if I remember correctly. O-ring in place, and then this cover is supposed to go on there. Kind of lube him up a little bit. This cover is going to have the tension on it, those springs behind it. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to push it enough downward by hand. Might be push it by hand to then be able to put our snap ring in place. Well, it went in a lot easier than it came out. So snap rings in place. Very nice. Shaft still turns. That's good. No leaky oil in our cup, which is also good. So that takes care of that component. Now we can worry about the little valve that goes in the hole here, and that's where this spring comes in. This guy here, which I believe the spring sits in that way. I'm going to take our spring, Drop our spring in, our little valve in there. Okay. Then it seams our little plunger with the O-ring that I put on. Then this is followed by a little snap ring here. And this one takes a little bit of pressure to hold him down as well. I don't know that I've got the dexterity to do this one on its own. That's where having a third arm would have been helpful, but we got our ring in. And that is all the internal stuff that we took out. So we can go ahead and put our O-ring on the outside, put our cover back on. So we'll get our big O-ring. Here. Big ring in place. And then, okay, before we put our cover on, I'll take this little O-ring. Get him set up in this little recess here. Nice and happy. Just for good measure. We take our cover. This opening is going to have to line up here. This opening here. To help with the alignment process, I'm going to take the long end of this stud and get him started, and then turn my cover over the body to the correct spot. I'm going to take a piece of wood, walnut, and probably benefit yeah, or slightly. Trying to get my hole lined up here. I think we're okay there. Our little fitting, new O-ring on the end. Okay, he will start. So put him in place. This little stud here, it's got a special little gasket on the end of this washer, which there was no replacement for, so I'm going to put a little bit of sealant on that before we put him in place, just to make sure he's got the seal we want.
We'll tighten these up on the vise, holding everything steady. Throw a cap on there for now. And I think we have a reasonably rebuilt layer style power steering pump. But with our flow divider, our power steering pedestal, and our power steering pump all rebuilt, we can wrap up this video series documenting the overhaul of the power steering system on our John Deere 430 two-cylinder tractor. I've also cleaned up our bracketing, some couplings, the steering shaft. The only things really left, I guess I gotta clean our pulley, and then hydraulic lines. Better than reusing the originals would be to have new ones made. Most hydraulic shops can simply, if you have the original template, make you a new line. This particular one goes between the pump and the flow divider. Between the flow divider and the pedestal was typically a rubber line. And again, that is fairly easily reproduced at any hydraulic shop. Some later tractors had a rigid set of metal lines, and these ones might be worth cleaning up. I don't know how they fit in there. I've not used those myself on any of my tractors. That was either a late 430 or maybe even a 440 series setup, but we'll clean them up, and when we get to the point of putting stuff back together, we'll see how they fit on the tractor. I thank you for watching. In the future, next time, we've got some exciting things happening with maybe some engine stuff. There's also some transmission progress being made here in the shop, so I hope you tune in for that. See you then.